Hey, Premier Investors, it's Adam Schrader here for another episode, joined by my co founder, Grant McMillan. And we are pleased today. We're going to talk about something, they say death and taxes are the two things you can't escape. Well, when you own real estate, one of those taxes you can't escape at the beginning is property taxes. So we've got Sam Thrash here. He is the head of client success at OwnWell, and we're going to dive into these exciting things. So, Sam, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit just about kind of why, what does Ownwell do? Like, I mean, people don't think they think I get property taxes, right? But a lot of people just take it. They take it
Yeah.
on the chin. They think, oh, there's nothing I can do about it. The area is going to tax me. I'm going to pay it. Um, what do y'all do, and kind of why is what you do important?
Yeah, appreciate it. So OwnWell, you can think of us as a tech-enabled property tax consulting firm. So we help property owners and real estate investors manage and reduce their property taxes through property tax appeals. You're exactly right. The reason we exist is something like 90% plus of property owners across the country take no action today. Yet we estimate, 30 to 60% are overpaying on an annual basis, and we're talking about billions in overpayment across the country. So, just a huge education and awareness opportunity, and that's our goal, is to make folks aware of what their rights are, what tools and mechanisms are kind of available to them, and hopefully reduce, one of the biggest expenses associated with owning real estate.
Yeah, and I want to throw out there, we're not just interviewing Sam. I use OwnWell in with several of my rentals. They don't operate in every single state because a lot of states doesn't make a ton of sense for a business to be involved there. But we do have properties in states like Texas that have incredibly high property taxes,
Yeah.
and then there are some states where we have like Alabama where protesting isn't really going to make much of a difference. The tax rate's pretty dang low there. So tell us kind of when y'all look at it, when you're evaluating properties and kind of when somebody should and when somebody shouldn't, kind of what does a property owner do? Like, how do you know when it's worth protesting?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it depends a little bit on the state. I think in general, it's important that you're looking at this every year, or certainly every time your property is reassessed. It's not something that you want to just react to only if the assessment increased, right? Even if it stayed the same or even went down, it doesn't mean that you're not still over assessed and there isn't still an opportunity for savings. So, maybe just to give an example, in a state like Texas, there is no risk to appealing your property tax assessment, right? What I mean by that is, by appealing, you don't have the risk of that assessment then increasing in response. And so in Texas, we blanket file, right? We're going to go pursue reductions on every property that we can. There are other states, and Georgia's one, where there's a little bit of a nuance with what they call a 299C provision, or what they call a freeze. And so if your property is frozen and you appeal, you actually give the county the opportunity to maybe review that and see, hey, it's been frozen, but market has gone up. This actually should be increased. And so you want to be thoughtful about when it makes sense. And that's why we exist, right? Is we will go through that exercise for every property every year on our platform, and make sure we're taking advantage of any opportunity that there may be. And we can talk a little bit more about kind of valuation methodologies and the types of evidence that would be helpful. But in general, you should be looking at it every year. Don't just accept the assessment at face value.
Sam, to kind of go on that, like say one of our clients, there's 90% or whatever that percentage was that may not even know that that they can protest their taxes. So a client coming in, what can they expect? How hands on do they need to be? What does that process look like from somebody that really wants to be kind of hands off but knows that there's tax savings that can't be had?
Yeah. So the way that we tend to kind of frame and articulate our service is free property tax monitoring. So it takes 2 to 3 minutes to sign up. All we need to know is your property information, verify ownership, and then we handle the rest, right? So you're authorizing OwnWell to act as your agent and to represent you in your local jurisdiction. And so after you sign up, we'll take care of everything. We'll monitor for those new assessments. We'll evaluate and put together an opinion of value to see if it makes sense to file. And then we'll handle all of the negotiations, attending hearings, everything like that that comes with the process. So it enables our clients to, get back to their busy lives, build their business, whatever it may be. And we only charge a percentage of the savings that we earn for clients. So there's no cost to sign up. You only will pay a fee if we successfully reduce your tax bill. So that really aligns our interests with obviously the interests of our clients.
Yeah, must lead to you doing quite a bit of pro bono work
Yeah,
on that front. And I just want to say, when you're looking at this, if you're evaluating protesting taxes yourself, which you
yep,
definitely can, it's not something.
absolutely.
Don't have to be the biggest rocket scientist in the world to do it, but there is a process. Like here in Austin, I protested my taxes myself for a couple of years, and then they made a change, and now you have to go in person in front of a 3 panel, uh, you know, thing of people who are retired or something and don't have anything better to do than sit on a property tax appeal board, right? And now suddenly I'm looking at a whole day maybe of
Yeah.
protesting, where it used to be I could just go in the office and sit down one on one with the guy and say, "Hey, here's my taxes should be lowered." So it's definitely worth looking at. What are some of the states that y'all operate that are kind of the hardest to get into? Like, what states have the most hoops you have to jump through to be successful?
Yeah. Yeah, it varies quite a bit. At the end of the day, ultimately, we're working mostly with county, with local government, and with that, comes some constraints, right? We'd love to make the process even faster, even easier, but ultimately, like you said, we've got to follow kind of the laid out process in each of those markets. I think some of the things that come to mind, yeah, there are places that require in-person hearings, right? And so if you're an investor whose asset or properties are in another market, right, that may be the biggest limitation to you being able to take this on yourself. There are some markets that introduce some friction, like filing fees. In order to even file or submit a protest or appeal, you actually have to pay a fee. So that's something that we'll factor into our analysis to say, hey, is it worth moving forward? Does the savings potential even outweigh the potential cost of moving forward with the appeal? And then we see big variance in timelines. In a place like Texas, we tend to see that, three quarters, maybe 80% of appeals are kind of wrapped up before rolls are certified, really by the end of the summer. In places like California, it can take over a year before you get a hearing scheduled. And so just staying kind of on top of that, keeping track of deadlines and when those hearings are taking place is one of the pain points, associated with the process.
Yeah, that's rough.
Yeah.
That sounds pretty rough. So if you're doing this yourself, I get things every year that says, what expenses did you have on the house? And some of them are relevant for property taxes. Some of them are not relevant for property taxes. What are some of the big things? If you do X, Y, and Z to your house, it will actually impact, your property tax assessment.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a really good question. I think, at least for residential properties, the thing that is going to carry the most weight by far is really sales, market data, right? In your neighborhood or in your market. So it's really important, just first and foremost, that you spend some time looking at sales comps and building a lot of your argument and your evidence around those transactions. But in addition to that, you're exactly right. One of the things that these counties or appraisal districts, whatever the authority is failing to do because they're leveraging mass appraisal techniques, is look at the unique characteristics associated with your property, right? And so if you have condition issues or deferred maintenance, things that really do impact the market value of your property, it's really important that you incorporate that, you articulate that in the process. So things that we look at, you can think of big ticket items, right? Structural, foundation, roof, fire, flood, mold, right? These are things that are costly to fix, to repair. And the best thing you can do, in addition to photos of those issues, is a quote or a bid or an estimate from a contractor or from a third party. It allows you to kind of assign an actual value that you can then use to argue for an adjustment to market value. Oftentimes, our clients have existing inspection reports or appraisals done, and we can leverage a lot of that in the evidence as well. Things that aren't as helpful doesn't mean they aren't a pain, for our clients to deal with, but things that typically don't move the needle are kind of more cosmetic or aesthetic things, right? Landscaping, paint, chips, small things that can be addressed at a relatively low cost are going to be harder arguments to make in the negotiation or in the hearing. There's also external variables, things like nearby construction or noise or electrical wires. We will try to articulate that, but those external variables often aren't also kind of considered or looked at when making an argument on the improvement value, the real estate value of the property.
Are there ever times in which you would tell someone not to protest their property taxes? I think you mentioned something like running the risk of having that appraised value increase. Are there other times though as well where maybe the data is just saying now's not the time?
Yeah, I mean, if there is no downside risk, then we want to be as aggressive as possible and would certainly encourage our clients to do the same. Now, we do get a question a lot, which may be relevant for your audience, which is, hey, I don't necessarily want to start or initiate this process and flag something to the appraiser or to the assessor that they don't know about, and that's a legitimate concern. What we do in our process is make sure that any evidence that's shared with us or that we have access to, we are evaluating it for that, right? Is this going to help make an argument, or would this potentially hurt the argument? And if it's the latter, we're obviously not going to include it in our evidence and not kind of bring attention to it. But sometimes there's no way around that, right? So for example, if you're renovating a property, and it's significant, you're adding square footage, right? You're filing permits in order to take on this kind of work. At least eventually, the county should have access to that and see that sort of thing. But they're often relying on satellite imagery, permits, that sort of thing. So if you've renovated the kitchen, great. Probably be careful about kind of how many photos are out there and visible and that sort of thing. But otherwise, the county won't really be able to identify that. I think in some states, they have the right to go visit and kind of view the properties, at least with permission. But typically in our experience, we haven't seen them exercise that right, except for higher value kind of commercial assets. So hopefully that's helpful. But no, you want to be as aggressive as possible.
So there's some people like myself, let's say your property is you buy it for $250,000. If they reassess it, it's going to be, $400,000 now because it's gone up faster than your appraised value. If that's the case, if your assessment is under market value, and whether it's with y'all or by themselves, is it worth, like, what good can it do if you protest that? Like, say, for example, in Austin again, I've got a homestead exemption, right? And it can only go up 10% according to the state, but the value is a lot more. Is it worth even looking into if you're an individual? Obviously, y'all are going to do a
Yeah.
lot of the legwork if not, but if I'm trying to save a couple bucks and doing it myself, does it even make sense to try?
Yeah. Yeah, I think those are really kind of two different situations. I'll touch on the homestead exemption piece because I think what you're getting at is a common misconception. I mean, you're exactly right. In pretty much every market, whether they call it a homestead exemption or not, your primary residence can benefit from these exemptions or other forms of relief, which will lower your tax bill. But even if you have that exemption, protesting is still a good idea. And the reason for that is, you're setting a lower baseline for future kind of assessment increases. And the other thing that may be really relevant for this audience, and is something I've gone through personally here recently, is I am an accidental landlord, and my old primary residence is now a rental property. And when that exemption falls off, I'm eating the full burden of that increase in market value, right? So by keeping your market value in check, even if you don't see it translate to tax savings today, can have that benefit in the future. So that's really, really important.
Gotcha. Thank you very much for that. I always wondered, I was like, I'm protesting, but what's the point?
Yeah. Now, going back to your first part of the question, there are some situations where it is very obvious that the property is underassessed. Something that's not exactly the same, but that we see a lot of the time is, hey, I just purchased this property, let's say in November or December of last year. And because most of these counties are assessing your property as of January 1st of each year, there's very little time between when you purchased and that valuation date. And if you have been assessed at or below purchase price, and assuming that your purchase was an arm's length transaction, kind of a valid, fully marketed sale, you're going to have very little argument to make going in there and say, hey, I think it should be
Cut that
assessed
one out.
lower. Well, then why did you purchase it at said price? So there are situations where it is tough. And, if you're busy and there's other higher priorities, sure, right? But it's at least going through that exercise of taking a look and seeing if there's something you're missing or another argument that could be made for that lower value.
Excellent. And what are some of the big mistakes you see people making whenever they've come to you and said, man, I've been doing this myself for 10 years. And you look at, their situation. I mean, you're head of client success, right? And you look at it and you think, and why have you done this the last few years, right? Like, I'm sure you see horror stories of people who have been trying it themselves and it just hasn't been working. So what are some of the things you've seen people mess up the most?
Yeah, so we have lots of clients, right, who have been doing it themselves historically, and whether it's things changed in their lives or their portfolio grew, it just became kind of no longer sustainable. Or to your point, they weren't really seeing the results that they had hoped or expected. I think one of the most common things we see, which is absolutely true, is a lot of our clients feel like they understand their property the best, and they do. They know it more intimately than anyone, and certainly than us, at least when it's first onboarded. I think oftentimes they're not appreciating enough how much data really goes into building a strong and effective argument. So we rely on 150 different data sources, some of those proprietary. But we're looking at lots of different data points. We're analyzing the county's own evidence that they're using to justify their assessment and seeing what kind of opportunities there are to poke holes there, right? We've built a lot of cool tech and tooling to facilitate that process. There's also the relationship piece. And sometimes it's kind of sad to admit, but our team, our property tax professionals in these markets that we operate in, have been operating in those markets for a long time. They have relationships in the appraiser's office or in the assessor's office, and that enables us to have certain conversations and negotiations that maybe just a one-off property owner would not be able to have. So we have that track record and kind of know what arguments really resonate and work. We also benefit from the volume, right? If we're submitting as many appeals as we do in some of these markets, it can give us some leverage going into those negotiations. But I think there's not a lot of real mistakes. It's just, hey, what kind of comes with experience and having done hundreds of thousands of appeals across these markets, you learn a lot of best practices that I think translate to better results.
Yeah. And the final thing I want to ask here is, if you haven't been protesting for a while, can you retroactively protest at all, or is it just this year I'm going to try to get it dropped a ton because it's higher than it should have been?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't want to make a blanket statement because, again, there's so many nuances kind of
Yeah.
from state to state, and certainly some exceptions kind of buried within the property tax code. But generally speaking, and this is why we focus so much of our time and energy on education like this, is you have a chance, a small window each year to file. Otherwise, you miss that opportunity, and you have to wait until the next year. I know that there can be some exceptions. I think there's a concept of a base year appeal in California where you can kind of look back, within a few years of when you purchased the property. But in general, it's something that you really have that chance once a year. And I maybe should have mentioned it earlier. What really starts the process for you, if you're excited to take this on this year and go protest or appeal, what starts the timer for you is your new assessment. So in Texas, for example, it's 30 days from when you receive that notice, or May 15th, whichever is later. That's how much time you have to appeal. In Florida, it's 25 days from the trim notice. In Georgia, it's 45 days from the notice of value. So as soon as you get that in the mail, the timer has started, and you've got to take action in that window. Otherwise, you really limit your opportunities.
Fantastic. Well, Sam, thanks for joining us. There's going to be a link in the show notes that everybody can use. In that link, you will get a special discount from Premier Turnkey on the first invoice. Because, like Sam said, the way they have it set up is beautiful. If they don't succeed, you don't pay. I love it. I think I've gotten a few bills, but hey, that's a good thing because it means I've saved a lot more money in than I'm paying out. So again, that link will be in the show notes. Is there any parting words you want to say before we wrap up here?
Just thank you for the opportunity. As I said, our mission is to just educate and spread awareness, regardless of whether or not you want to leverage OwnWell. We hope you consider us a resource, right? So visit our website. Lots of information on there. Have an incredible team. We're always happy to answer questions and make sure folks are kind of exercising their rights and paying no more than they need to in property taxes.
Yep. Sometimes as a real estate investor, you don't get to do the most exciting things, but if you do them the right way, you can save yourself a lot of time, money, and headaches. So, if you want to see some properties that you can protest their value in the future, you can head on over to premierturnkey.rei.com. That's premierturnkey.rei.com and see everything we have there. You can schedule a time to talk with us. Like I said, there's a link in the show notes for you to go and sign up with OwnWell and get your Premier Turnkey discount the first time they save you money. So, Sam, again, thanks for joining us. And remember, everybody,
Thank you.
you can live how you want when you invest where it's smart.